Hi there, Planeswalkers! Welcome to Partners With. I'm your host, Andrew, and today I'm bringing you a deck tech. The deck we're taking a look at today is Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. Golos is a legendary artifact scout creature from Core Set 2020 that costs 5 generic mana for a 3/5. He has 2 abilities. His first says, when Golos, Tireless Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card and put that card onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. His second ability is an activated ability that costs 2 and a Wooburg and says, exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you may play them this turn without paying their mana costs. The more popular deck build for Golos involves playing a lot of ramp spells and high-cost, high-reward spells, so you can activate his second ability and repeatedly play huge spells for free. My build, however, takes a more lands matter approach by focusing on his first ability. As a disclaimer, this particular build of Golos is my personal build, and doesn't follow a particular budget and isn't the absolute best way to play this commander. It's just a deck that I built on my own from scratch that functions quite well in its current form. Let's take a look at our primary win condition in this style of Golos deck in our first strategy, Solving the Maze. Our big win condition in this deck is Maze's End, a land card that enters tapped and taps for 1 generic mana. You can pay 3 and tap it to return it to your hand, and when you do, you may search your library for a gate card, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your library. When you activate this ability, if you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. I think it's pretty obvious where this is going. The goal is to play Golos, search for Maze's End, then use the 2 of them as well as other land searching cards to grab 10 different gates and win the game. Sure, we can use Maze's End's ability to help us grab gates, but because it goes back to your hand when you use this ability and it enters tapped when you play it again, it can be pretty slow. On top of that, if you use Maze's End's ability to grab your 10th gate, then you will be sitting on your win condition for a full turn rotation before you can actually win with Maze's End, leaving you very vulnerable. So what you want to do instead is to leave Maze's End untapped on the battlefield when you grab your last gate using Golos' ability. The way we repeat Golos' Enter the Battlefield trigger is by either blinking him or cloning him. Cloning is self-explanatory, and blinking is when you exile a target permanent you control and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Let's take a look at the cards that do this, and with our next strategy, Blinky. First we have a set of instants that all blink a creature. First we have Cloud Shift, which costs 1 white and blinks target creature you control. Ephemerate is the exact same card, except it has Rebound, which exiles Ephemerate if you cast it from your hand, and you may cast it from exile at the start of your next upkeep without paying its mana cost. Momentary Blink costs 1 and a white to blink a creature you control and has Flashback for 3 and a blue. Acrobatic Maneuver blinks a creature you control for 2 and a white with the added bonus of drawing you a card. Essence Flux costs 1 blue to blink a creature you control, and if it's a spirit, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Next we have Ghostly Flicker, which is a little more powerful. It costs 2 and a blue to blink 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control. Teferi's Time Twist costs 1 and a blue to blink target permanent you control, and if it enters as a creature, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Next up we have some creatures that blink creatures you control. Nephalia Smuggler costs 1 blue for a 1/1 human rogue, and you may pay 3 and a blue and tap it to blink a creature you control. Soul Herder costs 1 white blue for a 1/1 spirit. It has, whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Soul Herder. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Restoration Angel costs 3 and a white for a 3/4 angel with flash and flying, and when it enters, it blinks a non-angel creature you control. Next, we have an assortment of permanents that blink cards. Oath of Teferi costs 3 white blue for a legendary enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile another target permanent you control, and it returns to the battlefield under its owner's control at the start of the next end step. This allows you to activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn. Conjurer's Closet is an artifact that costs 5 generic and lets you blink a creature at the start of each end step. This is a very powerful blink effect for this deck. Deadeye Navigator is the star of this deck. It's a 5/5 spirit that costs 4 blue and has Soulbound. which means you can pair it to another unpaired creature you control when either of them enters the battlefield, and they remain paired for as long as you control both of them. As long as it's paired with another creature, you may pay 1 and a blue to blink either Deadeye Navigator or the creature it's paired with. This allows you to blink Golos and get his ETB at any time for just 2 mana. You can also use this effect to protect both him and the Navigator by blinking them if they're ever targeted or blocking a creature. Now we'll check out how we'll ramp our mana base in order to cast all these spells in the next strategy, Scouring the Lands. We're going to look at these mana ramp spells in order of ascending mana cost, starting with our 2 1-mana spells. Burgeoning is an enchantment for 1 green that lets you put a land onto the battlefield from your hand whenever an opponent plays a land. If you get this out on turn 1 with 3 lands left in your hand, then you're going to start your second turn with 4 lands, assuming each of your opponents hits their land drops. Next is Open the Gates, a sorcery for 1 green that lets you search your library for a basic land card or a gate card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle to your library. Once Upon a Time is an instant that costs 1 and a green, but if it's the first spell you cast this game, you may cast it for free. When you cast it, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may reveal a creature or land card from among them and put it into your hand. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Gatecreeper Vine costs 1 and a green for a 0/2 plant creature with Defender, and when it enters the battlefield, you get the same effect as Open the Gates. Springbloom Druid is a 1/1 elf druid that costs 2 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, you may search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. District Guide is a 2/2 elf scout for 2 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, you get an Open the Gates effect. Growth Spiral only costs 1 green and 1 blue, but since it's 2 different colors, I'm putting it in with the 3-drop spells. It's an instant that lets you draw a card, then you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. This does not count as playing a land for turn. Circuitous Route is a sorcery for 3 and a green that lets you search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then you shuffle your library. Into the Wilds is an enchantment for 3 and a green that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Bayburrow Elder costs 1 green-white for a 0/0 Treefolk Druid with Vigilance. It gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control, and you may tap it to add 1 mana for each color among permanents you control. At worst, it's a 2/2 body that taps for green and white, since it brings green and white in its mana cost. And at best, it's a 5/5 that taps for all 5 colors, which is easily achievable by having Golos on the battlefield. Next up, we're going to take a look at our defensive cards, such as counterspells, attack taxes, and removal spells in our strategy Defensive Maneuvers. Our first batch of defensive spells are focused on removing enemy threats. Despark is an instant for 1 white and 1 black to exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Single Combat is a sorcery for 3 white that says each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the start of your next turn. Essentially, this forces each player, yourself included, to choose 1 creature or planeswalker to be your only creature or planeswalker until the start of your next turn. Next, we have Time Wipe, a sorcery that costs 2 white blue, and bounces a creature you control to your hand, then destroys all the remaining creatures on the battlefield. You usually want to bounce Golos back to your hand, since this allows you to avoid command attacks. Terra Eternal is an enchantment for 2 and a white that makes all of your lands indestructible. Next we have Taxation Spells, permanents that force our opponents to pay mana in order to attack us. The poster child of taxation spells is Ghostly Prison, followed closely by Propaganda. Ghostly Prison costs 2 and a white for an enchantment that forces your opponents to pay 2 mana for each creature they want to attack you with. Propaganda is the exact same card except it costs 2 and a blue. Archon of Absolution is a 3/2 Archon for 3 and a white with flying, and taxes your opponents for 1 mana for each creature they want to attack you with. Sphere of Safety is a particularly powerful taxation spell that will likely only climb in price as time goes on. It costs 4 and a white and taxes your opponents for X for each creature they want to attack you with, where X is the number of enchantments you control. By default, this taxes your opponents for 1 mana, but even adding just 1 enchantment to that makes this as good as Ghostly Prison or Propaganda. Add 1 or 2 more enchantments to your board and it becomes a high price for your opponents to pay, especially if those enchantments also tax them. We now move on to counterspells, starting with Counterspell itself. It costs 2 blue and simply counters target spell. Narset's Reversal isn't necessarily a counterspell, however it does temporarily stop an instant or sorcery and gives you a copy of it. This card is quite versatile in that it can enable you to steal the effect of an opponent's instant or sorcery, or you can use it to copy one of your own, essentially giving you a copy of a given instant or sorcery for 2 blue more. More ramp, more blinking, more board wipes, etc. Dovin's Veto costs 1 white and 1 blue to counter target non-creature spell, and it itself cannot be countered. Unwind and Rewind are very similar cards, Unwind costing 2 and a blue to counter target non-creature spell, and Rewind costing 2 and 2 blue to counter target spell, and both untap up to 3 lands and up to 4 lands respectively. These can actually net you mana if you have any lands that tap for more than 1 mana, such as Lotus Field. Next up are artifacts that either generate mana or get you lands in the strategy Mana Rocks. We'll also rope these together by mana costs. In this build of the deck, I run a Selesnya Signet and an Izzet Signet, both costing 2 and have pay 1 and tap, add 2 of their respective colors. Of course, you could swap these signets out for other signets if you change the build and need different colors of mana, or want to include better mana rocks and have the budget to do so. Both of these artifacts cost 3 mana and tap for 1 mana of any color. Darksteel Ingot has Indestructible, and Chromatic Lantern gives all of your lands the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color, which is one of the best and most important effects in a 5-color deck. Both of these artifacts cost 4 mana, with Firemind Vessel entering tapped and being able to tap for 2 mana of different colors, and Scaretiller entering as a 1/4 Scarecrow creature. Whenever Scaretiller becomes tapped, you may choose to put a land card from either your hand or your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Next up, we have general support cards. These range from spells that clone Golos to get even more ETBs, save our lands, or grab us more cards. Let's get our 2 extraneous support cards out of the way first. Swarm Intelligence is an enchantment that costs 6 and a blue and lets you copy an instant or sorcery when you cast it, and you may choose new targets for the copy. This is an extremely versatile card in any deck that runs a lot of instants and sorceries, and in this case it lets us double our blink and ramp effects, although copying a blink spell does not let you blink the same creature twice. Swiftfoot Boots is a generically good commander card, costing 2 and equipping for 1, giving the equipped creature hexproof and haste. This can protect a given creature from being targeted by your opponents. Diabolic Tutor is a sorcery that costs 2 and 2 black, and lets you search your library for any card and add it to your hand, then shuffle your library. Also, its card art is one of my absolute favorites. Any card you say? I'll take it. Drawn from Dreams is a sorcery for 2 and 2 blue, and lets you look at the top 7 cards of your library and put 2 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Altered Ego costs X 2 green blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter. This spell cannot be countered, and it enters on the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it enters with X additional +1/+1 counters on it. You may pay 0 for X, and you may use this to make a stronger copy of any of your opponent's creatures. Worth noting, if you use this to clone a legendary creature that's already on your side of the battlefield, you will get the ETB of the copied creature, and you will then have to sacrifice either the original or the copy due to the legendary rule. Spark Double costs 3 and a blue for a 0/0 illusion. Spark Double enters the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, and it enters with either an additional +1/+1 if it's a creature, or 1 extra loyalty if it's a planeswalker, and it is not legendary if the copied creature is legendary. This gets around the legendary rule and lets you make both the original and the copy stick around if you copy a legendary card with Spark Double. This also means you can copy a legendary creature with Spark Double to create a non-legendary copy, then copy that copy with Altered Ego to create a second non-legendary copy of the creature. These next 3 spells recur lands from your graveyard. Ramanap Excavator costs 2 and a green for a 2/3 Naga Cleric that lets you play lands right from your graveyard. Splendid Reclamation is a sorcery for 3 and a green that returns all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Crucible of Worlds is an artifact for 3 mana with the same effect as Ramanap Excavator, but because it's an artifact, it is harder to remove than a creature, and it costs more than Ramanap Excavator in terms of real-world money. Panharmonicon is a 4-mana artifact that says if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Yarok the Desecrated costs 2 black, green, blue for a 3/5 legendary elemental horror with Death Touch and Lifelink. Yarok's ability is just like Panharmonicon, except that it affects any permanent entering the battlefield under your control, not just artifacts and creatures. If you have Panharmonicon, Yarok, a Spark Double clone of Yarok, and an Altered Ego copying the Spark Double, then every time Golos enters the battlefield, you get to search for 5 cards. This is only in Magical Christmas Land, but with this setup you can play Golos and blink him once, and then have all 10 gates you need for Maze's End. Let's look at some extraneous win conditions that I really put in for funsies. Approach of the Second Sun is a sorcery that costs 6 and a white, and when you cast it from your hand, and you cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, you put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. You can cast this card once, gain your life, and put it back into your library, and then when you cast it again later, you just win. Worth noting, you can use Golos' second ability to exile it off the top of your library and cast it for free. However, since it's not cast from your hand in this instance, it cannot win you the game if this is the second time you've cast it, but it will still be put into your library 7th from the top, so casting it for the first time with Golos' second ability will still work. Altar of the Brood is an artifact for 1 mana that says whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Because this build of the deck has you constantly putting lands onto the battlefield, you'll be constantly milling your opponents. This has a low chance of winning you the game, but it can dump some of your opponent's threats, and if they're already drawing through their deck quickly, this can really hurt them. Keep in mind, any deck that wants to put cards into their graveyard, usually black decks, will only benefit from your Altar of the Brood. These next few cards are all in here both for ramp and for the Revel in Riches win condition. Revel in Riches is an enchantment for 4 and a black that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap and sacrifice this artifact. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. If you have this card on the field and a board wipe goes off, you will more than likely get all 10 treasure tokens you need to win the game. If you have a board wipe in your hand, and this on the battlefield, then you'll want to wait until the player immediately before you in rotation moves to their end step. Then you can board wipe on the phase right before your upkeep. This is the safest way to ensure that your Revel in Riches and treasure tokens stick around long enough for you to win with them. Spell Swindle is an instant for 3 and 2 blue that counters target spell. You create X treasure tokens where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Brass's Bounty is a sorcery for 6 and a red that creates a treasure token for each land you control. This is really good since you're already playing a ton of lands. Smothering Tithe is an enchantment that costs 3 and a white and creates a treasure token every time your opponent draws a card, unless they pay 2 mana. These cards are all great for ramping you with the tokens, and if you have Revel in Riches, they all get you closer to your win condition. These are good cards to hit off of Golos' second ability as well. I'll include the Planeswalkers in the support strategy, although it seemed most appropriate to save them for closer to the end. Ugin the Ineffable costs 6 mana, and for 4 loyalty it has the static ability colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. For +1 loyalty, exile the top card of your library and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token, and when that token leaves the battlefield, you put the exiled card into your hand. For -3, you may destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Ugin is great for throwing up 2/2 blockers and grabbing you cards, as well as destroying threats. Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, costs 1 and 2 hybrid red-blue mana for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. She has the static ability, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. Her -2 ability lets you turn a target artifact you control into a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until the end of the turn. With this you can copy a spark-doubled legendary creature, probably a copied Yarok, a Mana Rock, or Panharmonicon. Lastly, we're finally onto our mana base. Command Tower taps for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Seaside Citadel and Mystic Monastery enter tapped and tap for 1 of 3 colors, green, white, or blue on the Citadel, and blue, red, or white on the Monastery. Plaza of Harmony gains you 3 life when it enters if you control 2 or more gates, and taps for 1 colorless or 1 mana of any type a gate you control could produce. Mana Confluence taps for any color at the cost of 1 life. Exotic Orchard taps for 1 mana of any type of land an opponent controls could produce. Lotus Field enters tapped and has hexproof, and when it enters you sacrifice 2 lands. It taps for 3 mana of any 1 color. Field of the Dead enters tapped and taps for 1 colorless, and when it or another land enters the battlefield under your control, and you control 7 or more lands with different names, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This ability can be copied by Yarok, and if you have clones of Yarok when you play a land with this card out, you're going to make a lot of 2/2 bodies to defend you. You can grab this card early on to get the most value out of it throughout the game. Dark Depths enters with 10 ice counters on it, and you may pay 3 to remove an ice counter from it. When it has no ice counters left on it, you sacrifice it and create Merit Lage, a legendary 20/20 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. Thespian Stage taps for 1 mana and has pay 2 and tap. Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land and gains this ability. Thespian Stage can become a copy of any land you own, including Field of the Dead and Lotus Field, and it can even become copies of your opponent's lands. There's a combo between Thespian Stage and Dark Depths to cheat out Merit Lage for only 2 mana, where you have both lands out and pay to make Thespian Stage a copy of Dark Depths. Since Dark Depths is a legendary land, then as soon as you copy it with Thespian Stage, you must choose one to sacrifice. Choose the original Dark Depths with the ice counters on it. Because the copy of Dark Depths did not enter as Dark Depths, it does not have any ice counters on it, and its ability goes off right after you choose a Dark Depths to sacrifice. You sacrifice Thespian Stage and create the Merit Lage token. You end up losing both lands, but gaining a 20/20 flying indestructible creature, and we run ways of recurring those lands anyways. Lastly, for our basic lands, we run 4 plains, 3 forests, and 9 islands. If you wanted, you can swap out half of your basic lands for basic snow lands, since they're basic lands with different names than their vanilla counterparts and will count towards the Field of the Dead ability. But these are slightly more expensive because of how rare they are, even though they were reprinted in Modern Horizons. And that's the deck. You could always improve upon it by running some more ramp spells, such as Kodama's Reach and Cultivate, or some draw spells, such as Brainstorm or Ponder. You could also fit in some more expensive mana rocks like Arcane Signet, and some big threats to cast with Golos' activated ability, like Ulamog and other large creatures. Really, Golos is a very versatile commander that can be taken in a number of different directions, and for that reason he's one of my favorite commanders of all time. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider checking out our other stuff. And if you'd like, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications whenever we upload. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day.